From this premise the learned doctor proceeds to the classical sentimental argument, that the male of all species, including man, are little more than chronic seducers, and that their chief energies are devoted to assaulting and breaking down the native reluctance of the aesthetic and anesthetic females. In her own words, regarding males, outside of the instinct for self-preservation, which, by the way, is often overshadowed by their great sexual eagerness, no discriminating characters have been acquired and transmitted other than those which have been the result of passion, namely, pugnacity and perseverance. Again, the italics are mine. What we have here is merely the old delusion of masculine enterprise and amour, the concept of man as a lascivious monster and of woman as his shrinking victim, in brief, the Don Juan idea in a fresh bib and tucker. In such bilge lie the springs of many of the most vexatious delusions of the world, and of some of its lauded farce no less. It is thus that fatuous old maids are led to look under their beds for fabulous ravishers, and to cry out that they have been stabbed with hypodermic needles in cinema theaters, and to watch furtively for white slavers in railroad stations. It is thus, indeed, that the whole white slave mountebankery has been launched, with its gaudy fictions and preposterous alarms. And it is thus, more importantly, that whole regiments of neurotic wives have been convinced that their children are monuments, not to cooperation in which their own share was innocent and cordial, but to the solitary libidinous of their swinish and unconscionable husbands. Dr. Gamble, of course, is speaking of the lower fauna in the time of Noah. A literal application of her theory to man today is enough to bring it to a reductio ad absurdum. Which sex of the Homo sapiens actually does the primping and parading that she describes? Which runs to "beautiful coloring," sartorial hirsute facial? Which encases itself in the vestments which "serve no other useful purpose than to aid in securing the favors" of the other? The insecurity of the gifted savant's position is at once apparent. The more convincingly she argues that the primeval mud hens and the she mackerel had to be anesthetized with spectacular decorations in order to "endure the caresses" of their beaux, the more she supports the thesis that men have to be decoyed and bamboozled into love today. In other words, her argument turns upon and destroys itself. Carried to its last implication, it holds that women are all Dona Juanitas, and that if they put off their millinery and cosmetics, and abandon the shameless sexual allurements of their scanty dress, men could not "endure their caresses." To be sure, Dr. Gamble by no means draws this disconcerting conclusion herself. To the contrary, she clings to the conventional theory that the human female of today is no more than the plaything of the concupiscent male, and that she must wait for the feminist millennium to set her free above his abominable pawings. But she can reach this notion only by standing her whole structure of reasoning on its head, in fact by knocking it over and repudiating it. On the one hand, she argues that splendor of attire is merely a bait to overcome the reluctance of the opposite sex, and on the other hand, she argues, at least by fair inference, that it is not. This grotesque switching of horses, however, need not detain us. The facts are too plain to be disposed of by a lady anthropologist's theorizings. Those facts are supported in the field of animal behavior by the almost unanimous evidence of zoologists, including that of Dr. Gamble herself. They are supported in the field of human behavior by a body of observation and experience so colossal that it would be quite out of the question to dispose of it. Women, as I have shown, have a more delicate aesthetic sense than men. In a world wholly rid of men, they would probably still array themselves with vastly more care and thought of beauty than men would ever show in like case. But, with the world what it is, it must be obvious that their display of finery, to say nothing of their display of epidermis, has the conscious purpose of attracting the masculine eye. A normal woman, indeed, never so much as buys a pair of shoes or has her teeth plugged without considering, in the back of her mind, the effect upon some unsuspecting candidate for her "reluctant" affections. 19. The actual husband. So far as I can make out, no woman of the sort worth hearing, that is, no woman of intelligence, humor, and charm, and hence of success in the duel of sex, has ever publicly denied this. The denial is confined entirely to the absurd sect of female bachelors of arts and to the generality of vain and unobservant men. The former, having failed to attract men by the devices described, take refuge behind the sour grapes doctrine that they have never tried, and the latter, having fallen victims, soothe their egoism by arrogating the whole agency to themselves, thus giving it a specious appearance of the volitional and even of the audacious. The average man is an almost incredible popinjay. He can think of himself only as the center of situations. All the sordid transactions of his life appear to him, and are depicted in his accounts of them, as feats, successes, proofs of his acumen. He regards it as an almost magical exploit to operate a stockbroker's shop, or to get elected to public office, or to swindle his fellow knaves in some degrading commercial enterprise, or to profess some nonsense or other in college, or to write so platitudinous a book as this one. And in the same way, he views it as a great testimony to his prowess at amour to yield up his liberty, his property, and his soul to the first woman who, in despair of finding better game, turns her appraising eye upon him. But if you want to hear a mirthless laugh, just present this masculine theory to a bridesmaid at a wedding, particularly after alcohol and crocodile tears have done their disarming work upon her. That is to say, just hint to her that the bride harbored no notion of marriage until stormed into acquiescence by the moonstruck and impetuous bridegroom. I have used the phrase, quote, in despair of finding better game, end quote. What I mean is this, that not one woman in 100 ever marries her first choice among marriageable men. The first choice is almost invariably one who is beyond her talents, for reasons either fortuitous or intrinsic. Let us take, for example, a woman whose relative naivete makes the process clearly apparent, to wit, a simple shop girl. Her absolute first choice, perhaps, is not a living man at all, but a supernatural abstraction in a book, say, one of the heroes of Hal Caine, Ethel M. Dell, or Marie Corelli. After him comes a moving picture actor, then another moving picture actor, then perhaps many more, 10 or 15 head, then a sebaceous young clergyman, then the junior partner in the firm she worked for, then a couple of department managers, then a clerk, then a young man with no definite profession or permanent job, one of the innumerable hosts which flits from post to post, always restive, always trying something new, perhaps a neighborhood garage keeper in the end. Well, the girl begins with the Caine Colossus. He vanishes into thin air. She proceeds to the moving picture actors. They are almost as far beyond her. And then to the man of God, the junior partner, the department manager, the clerk. One and all, they are carried off by girls of greater attractions and greater skills, girls who can cast gaudier flies. In the end, suddenly terrorized by the first faint shadows of spinsterhood, she turns to the ultimate numbskull and marries him out of hand. This, allowing for class modifications, is almost the normal history of a marriage, or more accurately, of the genesis of a marriage under Protestant Christianity. Under other rites, the business is taken out of the woman's hands, at least partly, and so she is less enterprising in her assembling of candidates and possibilities. But when the whole thing is left to her own heart, that is, to her head, it is but natural that she should seek a wider range of choice as the conditions of her life allow, and in a democratic society, those conditions put few, if any, fetters upon her fancy. The servant girl, or factory operative, or even prostitute of today may be the chorus girl or moving picture vampire of tomorrow and the millionaire's wife of next year. In America especially, men have no settled antipathy to such stooping alliances. In fact, it rather flatters their vanity to play Prince Charming to Cinderella. The result is that every normal American young woman, with the practicality of her sex and the inner confidence that goes therewith, raises her amorous eye as high as it will roll. And the second result is that every American man of presentable exterior and easy means is surrounded by an aura of discreet provocation. He cannot even dictate a letter or ask for a telephone number without being measured for his wedding coat. On the continent of Europe, and especially in the Latin countries where class barriers are more formidable, the situation differs materially, and to the disadvantage of the girl. If she makes an overture, it is an invitation to disaster. Her hope of lawful marriage by such means is almost nil. In consequence, the prudent and decent girl avoids such overtures, and they must be made by third parties or by the man himself.